So, Nicole, I'm Suzanne from LDC, and I'm joined by some of my LDC colleagues and also coaches and people from around the country here. The way we've typically been doing this is Nicole and I have sort of been the thinking partner, and then we have previously had authors join in who were willing to sort of be in the hot seat and not just listen to the conversation about their tasks, but also participate during this sort of workshopping session. So I feel like, I don't know if any of you have ever watched Car Talk, and they do that stump the chump thing where you have to say, like, have we ever spoken about this since the last time you were on the show? And the person says, no, we've never spoken. So Nicole, I would like to just check in with Nicole that we have not done any pre-conversation about this in any way.
We have not.
No. And I myself looked at the task for maybe 20 minutes in preparation, because one of the goals with this kind of session is to do this the way it happens in the real world, which is you don't get a lot of time beforehand to kind of go in and dig deep. So what you do during the workshopping session is actually kind of the thinking around what you're encountering when you see a task, and then try to think about it with other people. Because we don't have a lot of people tonight, I'm hoping that means we're all going to be in this talking together, because we've got lots of people who have lots of expertise to bring to bear. So Nicole, do you want me to share my screen, or do you want to share? I'm happy to.
Why don't you start out, and then we can see if it makes sense to swap around as we talk.
If Barbara wants to share for whatever reason, we can flip around. So the thing I want to point out is that on my desktop, in getting ready for such a conversation, here are sort of the way that I set it up. And I don't know, Nicole, you or Barbara, anybody here might have other ways that we can share, but here's my screen. So I have the agenda here, which is our agenda for tonight. And then I have a bunch of things laid out across the top in tabs. I have the task that we're going to be looking at. I have the texts, and I have both in the module, there's a online version, and then there's also a Word version, which is not that. So I didn't set that up right. There it is. There's two versions of the text inside the module. So I have those open. And then I have my tools. So the first is the protocol that we'll use tonight to have this conversation. And then I have all kinds of things. I have the standards booklet laid out. I have the templates, because sometimes it helps to be able to look at different templates when thinking about a task. And I'll move it to the 6 to 12 grade level since we're in a 9th grade here. I have the pitfall checklist. I have the curriculum alignment rubric, which gives me some ideas for sort of indicators and thinking about quality in the task. I have this types of assignment document, which sometimes helps me at least think about, is the type of assignment being asked central to the discipline, and what other types of assignments might work better given purpose of task. And then I have disciplinary understandings, which is a really great document that I use a lot to think about discipline and whether the task is central to the discipline. In this case, we're doing literature, so I have the literature pages there. So that's what I got open. Nicole, do you have anything else that you have set up that you want to share, or is that similar to your kind of setup?
No, that's really the exact same way that I do it. And in some cases, I take a little more time ahead of time to look deeply into the task and think about which particular resources out of this set I might need the most. When I haven't had as much time to prepare, I really keep them all open in tabs just like this. And then it gives you a chance to be really flexible in just moving to whichever resource you realize you need in the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so because, I'm going to go back to the, I'm sharing my screen so I can't see everybody, if we've had other people join us or not. But since we haven't, what would be really helpful is you just say your name and where you are, or maybe what your LDC work is. So that way, if we're all talking together, we sort of we know who each other are. So Nicole, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm Nicole Renner. I'm the manager of core content development here at LDC. And for me here, since LDC is distributed, is in Austin, Texas.
Okay. Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Brown. I'm in Long Island, New York, Oceanside, and I'm the I3 Grant Director in New York.
Karen?
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Venditti, and I'm in Crown Point, Indiana. I work for the I3 grant with Los Angeles schools and also with SREB in North Carolina.
Okay. Monique?
Hi, I'm Monique Wharton. I'm in Athens, Tennessee, and I work with the I3 grant also in Los Angeles with Karen and with SREB in South Carolina.
Okay. Danielle?
Danielle Brewer, Manager of Professional Learning here at LDC, and I am now based in Glastonbury, Connecticut.
And I think we have someone else on the line. Is there anyone else who hasn't introduced yourself?
I'm Kathy Sadler.
Oh, Kathy Sadler!
I'm a literacy specialist in Arkansas.
Oh, and you don't have your video on, so I didn't know it was you. Hi.
Hi.
All right, and Stevie, how about you?
I'm from here in Denver. I do a lot of supportive schools, many of them that are connected with LDC work, and so I'm trying to learn.
Okay. Sounds great. All right, so let's begin. Nicole, do you want to lead us in the protocol?
Sure, let's go. All right. So I'm going to use the protocol to start the conversation. We also might step back a little bit sometimes metacognitively and think about what we're doing in the workshop. But let's go ahead and if you could just scroll down a little bit, Suzanne, and start with the first few steps. We're lucky enough to have the task author with us tonight, which enables us to do step 2, which I think is a really powerful step. So we're going to just look at the task, and then we're going to talk to Barbara a little bit about what she was hoping to accomplish. So let's go right to the prompt. After reading Barbie Doll by Marge Piercy, write an essay in which you analyze the impact of specific word choices and figurative language on the poem's social commentary. Support your discussion with evidence from the texts. And what Suzanne is doing right now is copying the task prompt so we can pop it up into the overview. That way we can play with it a little bit without having to edit directly in the prompt field and maybe look at some different versions of it. But before we get there, Barbara, what was your driving purpose behind creating this task? What are you really hoping to accomplish with students with this task?
So I used to be an English teacher, and this came from, on the AP exam, kids are asked to write about social commentary. That's like a very specific skill that's like constantly mentioned in the prose essay section. And the prompt always says, like, how do literary devices contribute to social commentary? And my kids, if they saw social commentary without it being broken down for them, they would kind of freak out. So I saw this as a module for maybe like a pre-AP course, 9th or 10th grade, where they start seeing the language of the AP exam.
Awesome. Okay, so I noticed that you had standards RL2 and RL4 as your focus reading standards for this task. So what drove you to using those standards with this task?
So the idea of social commentary, that's like a theme of a poem or any text. So that's what brought me to 2. And then I thought for reading standard 4, it's kind of about how word choice and figurative language contribute to social commentary. So I thought those 2 fit together.
So
I'm curious.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm curious to know in this particular case, if you picked the poem first and then thought about the standards, or if you picked the standards first and then went to a text, because I'm really excited to talk about this task because this is such a rich poem. It's such a great poem for high schoolers. And I feel like it embodies what one of my favorite people says about ELA, which is sometimes the text tells you what questions to ask. So I'm just wondering which way you went with that.
I think it was like together. Like I knew I always loved teaching this poem, and then I knew I wanted to teach social commentary, so I thought that they would be joined together nicely. But maybe it did start with the text because I just really liked the piece.
So I'm super easy. Excited also, Nicole, because, so Barbara, I'm interested that you were thinking about AP, because one of the things I was trying to think about and why I'm excited about this conversation is I think that hopefully we're going to talk a lot about the discipline of literature and what our standards are in that discipline. Because I was trying to use, the pre-work that I did do was to look at these 3 standards and then think about your task and try to figure out, this is such an important skill in literature classes, right? Like you said, like trying to understand how literature is social commentary, almost in and of itself, right? And how authors deliberately structure literature as social commentary is such an important thing. And yet, when we think about the Common Core standards, at least, this is like the big shame of Common Core standards, is some of our more Englishy standards aren't in them. They're just not there.
Not there.
So I think what you're doing is doing something that's so central, and yet the standards aren't good enough almost for what you're doing.
So funny that you say that, Suzanne. That's exactly what I was thinking about this task. I thought this is a really neat opportunity to think about not how do you get the language of the standards into your task, because you can see really clearly right away that the language of the standards is here in your task, right? So I'm thinking about getting to the next level of using this task to even go deeper about what these standards could mean and how they could manifest in an ELA task that is really central to the discipline. And I think that you've done that already in some parts, where you take the idea of theme and central idea from standard 2 that's very broad and generic, and you've brought that into something more specific in the idea of social commentary. You said that earlier. You said, the social commentary kind of is the theme in this case. I'm wondering if we can dig into this text and think about whether there are ways to get more specific and about what word choices and figurative language look like in this poem, what kind of language we're interested in pointing students towards, and whether that becomes part of the language of the task or just part of what the teacher knows as they teach the task and guide students through the poem. It might go either way, but I think it is a neat opportunity to go deeper than the language of the standards, which in some cases can be a little broad or generic.
So before we do that, Nicole, go ahead, Danielle.
Oh, I was going to say, so one question I had before we get really, really deep into it, is I'm noticing in the overview you have like the reading literature standards identified, but as
I thought I popped in RI instead.
Yeah, so I was just curious, like how different the language of the standards does change when we really do look at the reading literature standards.
Was that just
it was just an oversight.
It was a not the, you just selected the other one. Okay.
Yeah.
It always starts as default on informational texting core tools. I've done that before.
It was 2, right? It was 2. So I'm just going to add that and remove the other one.
And
so yeah, before we get there, though, so delete RIs and then add the RL4, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So before we get there, so Nicole, the one thing I did do in my sort of preparation in thinking about was around this issue of standards exactly. And so let me show you what I did, because maybe this will help get to your point, which is let's look at the text and really think about the task. So one of the things I've been playing around with a ton lately is the language standards, because I think that the language standards, so the problem for me with the reading literature standards is they're just about determining meaning, right? And then there is something about analyzing cumulative impact of word choices on meaning and tone. And I think that's what you're getting to, Barbara, in this, right? You're thinking about analyzing the impact of these specific word choices. But the interesting thing I think about the language standards is that they have this other layer around applying knowledge of language, right? And I just think it's, I don't know, I just got really interested in, so the corresponding language one, just L5, which is demonstrate understanding of figurative language, which is different than the reading, which is the different, in the reading, you're just supposed to determine words and meanings, right? And analyze an impact. And this is demonstrate understanding. So I think that's slightly interesting. But then more interesting was this, language functions in different contexts. And that got me thinking about your idea about social commentary. And I'm not sure in this poem that's what happens, but certainly language that is social commentary functions differently, right? Like authors use language to function differently when they mean it to be social commentary. Now that's different in poetry than in nonfiction writing, of course. But anyway, I pulled those up as other ways to think about it. And then the last thing I'll say is I then tried to go in, which is why I was so interested that you said you were thinking pre-AP.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to pull out the AP standards in Core Tools, and for whatever reason, we only have the Lang comp. We don't have the lit standards in there.
Mm.
So that's annoying and not helpful. So then I just went to the lit ones down here. I put them in this bottom part.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see, like, where is this analysis around social commentary in English classes? Like, how can we describe it in a way that we could share with English teachers in lots of other ways? And I'm not sure exactly, but it could be this, right? It's a little bit this evaluation of literature as in consideration of their social, I don't know what it is, but I was frustrated. I guess my only point is I was super frustrated around not having good English standards. And then the last thing I did was pull this like little thing about social commentary because I was trying to figure out what you meant by it. And maybe that's what we'll do now is go in and look at the text, Nicole, and see. But anyway, that was all my rumination beforehand as I was trying to get to like, what is the really disciplinary standard that you're working on here? Like, what's the meat of it? And I think
I also
with that impact. Go ahead.
I just popped into chat a link to old AP prose essay prompts. So that's where this came from. So it's actually from the language of one of, or a couple of these old prompts.
Super interesting.
So yeah, if you look at the 2003 one.
Oh my God, why don't we have a task for every one of these?
Mm-hmm.
I've got this in my old AP Lit binder on the shelf. We can do that.
Nicole, that's what we need. Look at this. Right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I would always take this and break it down by like, what are the terms that my kids don't know? And then turn those into modules.
That's right. That's exactly right. Okay. So anyway, I don't, Nicole, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that standard issue or if that's just beside the point to get to where you wanted to go, which is to go look at the text. But
well, I think that it's just interesting to note that. It's interesting to surface the fact that sometimes the standards don't have everything that we need for the discipline. And I also want to point to the fact that we do have something like this in our disciplinary understandings document. So connecting back to some of the resources that we have pulled up, we have the idea that an enduring understanding of ELA is the role of literature and different forms of text in reflecting and shaping culture. And I think that connects to this idea of social commentary. So we've known for a long time that there are some things that are not in the standards that we care about, and bringing these things together with the language of the standards might be that sweet spot of how you get to that kind of exemplary, really central to the discipline sort of task.
right. It also just reminds me why task examples are so important, because if the standards don't contain everything in a discipline, then having models and having examples just becomes much more valuable, frankly, right?
Yeah.
All right. So do you want to look at the...
I'm motivated to go straight to the text in this case. Usually when I look at a prompt, sometimes I think about, well, okay, if the prompt's not really clear, let's talk about the standards, the overview, how we can figure out where this task is really going. In this case, I think that clarity is present already, and it's about refining. So
if I just step back a minute, if I were to take the pitfall checklist, for example, and look at it, where is it? Here we go. I mean, the one I'm most interested in are these ones about worthy of time, right? The other things are not present in this task currently.
Right.
That I can see yet. So yeah, let's do it. I put the task at the top of the text so we can have it close by.
Great. So I guess the question that I would ask here, I don't think there's anything wrong with the language of specific word choices and figurative language. So one thing that's nice about that is if your students are ready, it leaves it up to them to figure out, what kind of word choices, what kind of figurative language should I look at here. But I'm also curious to know, as you read the task, Barbara, and as you read the text, what language stood out to you? And how would you think about defining that sort of language as you worked through this poem with students?
Yeah, I'll share some of the things that my kids always brought up with it. In the first part, they always talked about the imagery of like the mini GE stoves and the dolls and like the wee lipsticks, like making women seem juvenile. They always like the phrase, the magic of puberty. And then the last sentence, kind of the derogatory terms that the child was called. So that's like the first stanza. But in each stanza, they were able to like pick out kind of this interesting language. I know, like if you go on to the third stanza, there's the like a fan belt, so that brings in the simile. Cut off her nose, that's kind of hyperbolic language there. And then at the end, there's the consummation. They always thought that was an interesting word. To every woman, a happy ending, the irony of that.
So we've got a lot going on, right? Concrete imagery, irony, hyperbole, metaphor, simile, all kinds of different things. You've got some attention just to tone, like you said, the derogatory terms of great big nose and fat legs. Like you can hear how a kid would say that in that mean tone. So much going on. That's what's challenging to me sometimes about these ELA tasks when you think about word choice and how vague and broad that description is, and then how specific do you want to get. You don't want to force the kid's hand about exactly what they address, but
Barbara, have you tried to answer this task yourself?
Yeah, I did. I wrote the first paragraph of it, and my thesis was that the imagery and the word choice of the author causes, what was it? Like the social commentary is like something about how women strive to these ideals and they're put down by society, and it can destroy them, something to that effect. So now I'm thinking about what Suzanne said about the pitfalls, about how this might not be enough for like a full week's worth of study. So I wonder if it would be better to like bring in a couple of more texts to use so they're not just stuck with one.
Well, that's super interesting. So that's something really interesting about the positionality of the module, right? So like if this is where you're teaching close reading analysis of certain rhetorical structures around language, then you could focus your task in more, right? And teach those things really deliberately. Or if this is more after you've done that, where you want them to become more fluid at both deriving social commentary, but also seeing how authors set that up, then you would have more. I didn't expect you to say that, Barbara. That's surprised me a little bit.
I didn't either. And to be honest, just given my own experiences with AP and pre-AP kids, I don't know if other people think this is sacrilege to say, but I think you can spend a week on a poem and have it be extremely worthwhile. Between thinking about the different kinds of language and what is the social commentary and how to build and structure that kind of analysis in an essay, there's a lot there. And I think sometimes when people are hesitant to spend that long to go that deep with a single text, it fails to equip kids with what they need to be able to do it in 40 minutes, which is what they have to do on the AP exam, right? Which is kind of insane. So I think that, again, like Suzanne said, it might depend on the purpose and the position of this module within a school year. But I don't think that inherently we should shy away from a module around a single poem like this.
I will say that I found this sentence in your overview, Barbara, to be so elegant in doing so many things at one time, which is showing the focus standards, but then talking about the placement of the module. I, by the way, just as an aside, found that to be a really useful descriptor. So, but Nicole, to your point, then maybe the way the task is worded does set that up, right? So that there's time to dig into, a teacher can then teach various ways of analyzing this poem. It does remind me a little bit of the rhetorical analysis module, though, in some ways, right? And so, Barbara, let me show you what I mean by that. So in rhetorical analysis, it's a pre-AP English task as well. And it's got a pretty interesting construct. How can the dog eat my page?
Uh-oh.
How is that possible?
Let me see if I can pull it up.
There we go. I got it. So in rhetorical analysis, what she does is, and I would like to say that I have met her before, and I feel very honored to have met her before. Beverly, she's from Arkansas. So what that task does is it asks about a specific text, but the kids practice the work of analyzing rhetorical elements in multiple texts.
Yeah.
And then the task is like the culmination of that teaching.
Mm-hmm.
I love that structure. We stole it for Words Matter, by the way.
Good. So that's a different option, actually, to be honest, right?
Yeah. Like the way I was envisioning this is like in the beginning of the year, they write about like all the themes in text. You know, they don't really, they're not specific on social commentary. They kind of connect the devices to any themes that they notice, kind of doing maybe like a device every week or so. And then this is kind of more like a culminating mid-year piece where they think they have free reign to think about all devices that are used. Mm-hmm.
So the one thing I keep coming back to in the language of the prompt is specific word choices, which again, straight out of the standard, right? But I'm still wondering if that is the best way to express what we want kids to pay attention to in a poem like this. Because, you know, the standards don't use the word diction, although English teachers use that a lot in place of word choices. And this might be a personal quirk, but I tend to think of diction or word choice as being a more useful construct in prose because there are so many more specific kinds of language use that are specific to poetry. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's as general as literary devices or poetic devices. Maybe it's something else, but I'm just kind of circling around that specific word choices part of the prompt and wondering if there's a way to get a little bit more specific to poetry in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think what might be causing me to think about that is that figurative language is really specific, right? Like we all know pretty much exactly what figurative language refers to, even though it includes multiple kinds of language. And then word choices is really super duper broad and open to interpretation. And again, that's not inherently a bad thing. I'm just wondering about focusing it to thinking about the language of poetry in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I came up with chose word choice because of particularly like in the first stanza, you see the terms like she was given dolls and GE stoves and irons, and it's all like such like feminine things that like society was kind of pushing her in that direction from like the very beginning. You know, like they didn't give her trucks or let her play sports. So I think like that was a very particular choice by the poet to bring in those details.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicole, are you saying you're thinking something like even saying this?
Maybe, I don't know.
There's something bothering you about that, I can tell.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to say diction since that's what the AP exam uses, but then I know the standard says word choices, so I wasn't sure.
Like that?
Mm,
Well, and that was a question I wanted to ask, if you don't mind me just jumping in.
please.
Yeah.
'Cause I think, isn't that sometimes where people get stuck with trying to use the language of the standard to make sure that we can find that language, but then if we, delve into other areas, we're afraid somebody's going to say, well, that's not really meeting the standard.
Mhm.
So I see what, because I went back to look at R4, right, when Nicole said that, to see, could that fit? Could that be adjusted? Just my thought.
Right. Analyze the key. On the other hand, the point about using the language of the standard doesn't always mean the exact wording, right? It means either a paraphrase or a
Mm-hmm.
elevated level of the standard, especially when the standards are so DOK low, right? So,
Yeah.
Well, the AP, there's an AP standard that says something about textual detail. Would that wording fit?
Well, one of the AP skills is also selection of detail. So that's like a separate device in itself. So there's diction and detail. Well, I think detail could fit with this because that's what we're getting at, is the details the author is bringing into this poem.
Mm-hmm. I think both are definitely at play. Again, looking at the text, some of it is the choice of examples of toys, miniature GE stoves and irons. But then choosing to say "we lipsticks" instead of just lipsticks, that is a word choice that brings additional power to the example of the kinds of toys that the poet is talking about.
that's why, Barbara, I think you're right in not having just figurative language, right? It's
Yeah.
not analyzing the impact of figurative language on the poem's social commentary.
Yeah.
It's something else and figurative language.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I suppose you could take both of those things out totally. And then there's open forum for kids to select what kind of things they're looking at. But it sounds like you want figurative language explicitly as part of what they write about.
Yeah, there's just a lot of examples in here that connect to the social commentary.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because another thing I thought about was syntax, but it's not really like that obvious, or there's not much of an impact, I think, till you get to the last stanza where it says, like, doesn't she look pretty? Consummation at last. Like, those are interesting examples of syntax. But the rest,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
notice it.
All right, so it sounds like, Nicole, we still are unsure about this section and whether it's word choice or diction.
Yeah. And I think that I think it matters, but it also, it's not that it's not working as is. We're just thinking about ways to refine even further, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it just, if you unpack specific word choice with your students and it becomes clear the kind of thing that is meant by that, maybe that's all it needs to be. And I'm just being super nitpicky. That's entirely possible here. Sometimes in your own discipline, you start to overthink, right? But
if you take diction to be word choice,
It is, yeah.
then you have that, right?
Right.
I think it sounds less clunky than word choices.
Right.
And it gives them an opportunity to learn that academic vocabulary that's specific to ELA, which I really like. I think that people sometimes hesitate to put words like that in a task prompt because students don't already know it, but it's like, hey, that's what unpacking the task is for. It creates those great opportunities to speak the language of the discipline.
So Barbara, you said something, what did you say about selection?
Selection of detail.
Oh, that selection of detail. Okay. All right. Do you care about that in this task, or this is something different?
I think it could be either that or diction. They both fit. But I think diction leaves it more open. Like if they wanted to talk about the word like consummation at the end, I don't think they can use selection of detail to talk about that. No, it seems like in this case, selection of detail just means selecting details which help you do your analysis, not what you're talking about, I don't think. Yeah. So diction is the right way to go. Right. All right, so that seems to bring Nicole a little bit of clarity or a little bit more precision that makes her sort of comfortable with this. Nicole, are there other things that you think are interesting to discuss related to the structure of this task?
I think one of the other places, since we're kind of on the theme of discipline in tonight's conversation, one of the other places we tend to look at that is in the writing product, right? So I'm wondering, Barbara, if you chose essay because that's the language that the AP prompts use? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because oftentimes with a task like this, I think we would encourage to call it something like a literary analysis, but in this case, you may have had a rationale for choosing essay so that it mirrors the language of the prompts they're going to encounter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
It's so funny because we're trying to get people to be more specific about writing products, and yet for English teachers, like essay is often the product.
Yeah.
The product.
Right.
Yeah. This exam, 3 essays, 40 minutes each.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. I'm looking in the comments. Monique has chimed in about AP Lit standards. Monique, do you want to say anything about that?
When Suzanne shared, I think it was Suzanne who popped them up there, I kept looking at R5 where it says students make careful observations of textual detail, establishes connections among observations, draws from those connections, and then there's an interpretive conclusion about the piece or the writer's writing meaning.
That's what they're doing, right?
Yeah, I keep thinking that. So could that language be kind of clean up that part where we've been talking about? Is there a way to fit? But I kept trying to come up with a way to fit that in, and I couldn't. So I'm struggling with that.
That's really interesting, Monique. And where that launches my thinking is to the part of the task workshop protocol that asks, like, where might there be potential miscues in the task, right? If you think about how a student is going to interpret this task and respond to it. And one thing I'm wondering about, it seems obvious to me, and again, you could unpack this in instruction, that you want students to identify what is the specific social commentary of this poem. But when I think about all the different ways that kids answer prompts with our best intentions, I could see them trying to talk like very generally about how the poem's language creates social commentary without talking about like what is the social commentary. Yeah. So that might be one more place to look in the task prompt, just to be like absolutely certain that the demand of that what is the social commentary to hit standard R2 is clear to students.
Well, right, and I've been thinking about that social commentary issue because I'm assuming that the unpacking of that has to come in the ladder, right? It's not. Yeah. There's a lot of things you could add into this around that, but it seems like it would still clutter up this task.
Yeah, that might be the case.
Right.
That's always a tough balance to strike, but I like thinking about that, like what needs to be super explicit in the task and what can be unpacked in the ladder.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I did the unpacking of social commentary and in like the preparing for the task essential vocabulary. And then again, in enhancing comprehension. So I was thinking about it in those 2 areas.
Nice.
So, I mean, it may be, and again, that's also open for interpretation, right? So kids will come up with different analyses of what the social commentary even is, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Kathy put in here, I'd forgotten about this poem, but What Little Girls Are Made Of.
Mm.
You were talking about bringing in a second piece, Suzanne,
Mhm.
possibly as having them walk through it with that and then building to broke it out. But that might be an interesting, but then we're getting into comparison contrast maybe, or in a comparison. I guess that would be a comparison of how the language in those two poems develops that.
Another thing that I not to throw us completely off, but one of the things that I'm now thinking about, since you said that, and Kathy, you brought up that poem, and I keep thinking about rhetorical analysis and the different structure. The other structure that's super interesting, I find, is Three Religions. Because Three Religions has in the latter this kind of interesting construct, which is this is from DC, and they needed it this way, but it has an assessment actually in the beginning where they give kids different articles on a different topic but the same prompt. Mm-hmm. And they do that pre-assessment, and then they go ahead and sort of teach the module, right? What you're reminding me of is, Barbara, one of the things you could add as a node or a detail or an extension or whatever, even as a mini task, a skills cluster at the end, maybe, mm-hmm. is like, post AP practice, which is basically you've done this module, and like what you just said, you have 40 minutes, you sit down, time, right? You could take that poem and have them do the same thing on demand. Mm-hmm. It's sort of an interesting construct in your module to show the relationship between the module and what you're trying to prepare them for.
And I think that really will entice a lot of the AP teachers who have always been, the DBQ kind of, how do I get them prepared for DBQ? So thinking about how we can incorporate that as a post-assessment and as part of the ladder. And in the overview is a great way to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was also thinking maybe at the end bring in like a male-centric poem or text, since this one is so female-centric, or like a different social commentary on like race or religion. Or
right.
I saw that in your extension. I thought that was really nice. It's or no, maybe it wasn't the extension, but yeah, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing I just want to point out, did everybody see what I did with this lit standard? I hope you saw how I pulled that up here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for modeling that, Suzanne. I've never had anybody model. I know you could do it because North Carolina was missing a lot of their standards, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, so especially for ELA, honestly, because we don't have good content standards, it seems like really useful. And I don't know, Barbara, if this standard matches.
Yeah, when Monique brought it up in chat, I thought it was the perfect one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In which case, you might drop 2, right? To be honest, because they have to do the work of RL2 in order to do this standard. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it might be a supporting thing, frankly, right? Okay. That's another thing to think about. Because
that's a neat way, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's a neat way to show what a focus standards cluster can look like in ELA. Because we often talk about, we show that graphic of reading, writing, and content, and usually we sub in 2 reading standards for mm-hmm. ELA, but here you have actually pulled in a different content standard from elsewhere that makes sense for your course, and that's a lovely model to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've never seen it done with AP before, so this really kind of helps me think about that and how to use this with teachers.
And I think with high school teachers too, AP Lit and AP Lang have standards that are so solid, and most ELA teachers in high school are aware of AP curriculum, so it would be a great place to go if their English ELA standards aren't really strong in their districts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, in the field of ELA, with the lack of really strong content standards, AP is often where I turn and back map, right? In some ways. So that's a nice cluster.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, So where are we on our protocol here? I think that we've done all these things, right? And worked our way through. So maybe what would be nice if is to take a step back and just ask people to, let's have a discussion around, Barbara, so what's it like to have a task of yours workshop like this? And then for the rest of you, what did you learn? What did you notice? What are you thinking about coming out of this conversation?
For me, my wondering was always how to use AP language within tasks, because I know sometimes teachers push back and say, I just want to use the task how it's written on the exam. But like, you can also manipulate it, put in your own text, think about what are the gaps that your kids are struggling with. Like I picked out social commentary and kind of build a new task that way. So now I feel like I have the ability to share that with teachers. And I think I'm really glad we put in diction. At first I was hesitant since it's not in those standards and I wanted the good to go. But now I just really want it in there because it's more authentic to what the kids need to hear.
I'm just putting a note to Barbara for later. I'm thinking that the way you described how you came to this task and why you wanted this task might be really useful for teachers to hear, right? And so even that list, the list you showed that had, you know, the sample prompts, the AP prompts, historical prompts, might be an interesting resource to add here, and to add in the teacher reflection. I'll take all this out, you don't need that, it was just my notes, but adding something in there about how exactly what you said at the beginning of this. Like to me, that was so super useful in understanding kind of what you were trying to do and why, and it might be really great to have that in there. I don't know. Okay. All right, so that was an aside. So, so Barbara, for you listening to the conversation, that are you saying that helped you clarify that for yourself a little bit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Got to bring in the AP content and skills.
You also said, I just want to point out that you were so focused on getting a good to go rating that it clouded in some way your judgment about what you really wanted in the task. So that's a great self-reflection, right? I mean,
That's
I think
interesting.
Hear us say that, like, have the language of the task in your standards in your task. Everyone sort of is like, oh, if I don't have the actual words, I'm going to be, you know, I won't get my reading.
Well, what's interesting about that observation for me is that, and I'm not officially peer reviewing your task right now, Barbara, but to me, this workshop was more of a like getting from good to go to exemplary than a getting from work in progress to good to go. And I think actually moving beyond using the exact language of the standards to thinking about the really precise disciplinary versions of that is one of the ways that you do that.
Well, and I think I've had recent conversations just in the last couple of weeks with teachers. They're like, is it okay for us to use the language? Like, is it copyright issues in terms of, can we use the exact language of the standards? So I think that's a good point to bring out, Nicole, as far as like, you know, a good place to start to really get a solid task that's truly aligned to standards is really to use that language. But then, as you were saying, to really make sure that clarity and the specific purpose of the task of what Barbara's really trying to get at with her students in this particular one, to get it to that higher level is to think a little bit more in terms of what does it really mean by that standard.
And that's so important because one of the things that I say to people a lot is like, they tried to get a whole discipline down into 10 standards. It can't possibly be as detailed as it needs to be, right? And it's not just the Common Core reading standards that do that. A lot of people's standards have these kind of big umbrella type statements, and you need to drill down and unpack and figure out what that means in concrete specific terms for a given text or topic or task. So it's nice to remember that they're not the end all be all. It's important to be able to see the clear alignment, but it doesn't have to say things exactly the way that the standards say them. And in many cases, it shouldn't.
And I think that's really important in terms of non-ELA teachers thinking about, because, you know, when we're looking at our content standards that we're trying to incorporate, a lot of times it's, you know, for history, it's, you know, describe World War II. Well, if I use the language of that standard in my task, there's no
You have
way
a pitfall.
yeah, there's no way we can do that. So thinking about how, you know, how does that standard drive what I want to focus on, but not necessarily obviously use the exact language of the standards. And same with science or CTE or any of those other disciplines where they have very broad standards. They may have some substandards that help specify a little bit more, but a lot of times they are very, very broad standards.
So how about Karen and Kathy and Stevie and anyone else who, Monique looks like she had to run to another meeting.
Well, I really appreciate the discussion about the verbiage of the standard and not using the verbiage of the standard, because I think, and Danielle, I think you were talking about that. Some teachers, you know, I'm constantly thinking about where my people are and where I can take them. And so sometimes we just have to say, use the verbiage of the standard. You know, here it is, use it. But then we need examples, great examples like this, where it's like, you know, the verbiage of the standard doesn't have to be there because we're getting to the meaning, the deeper meaning of the standard. And this is an example that takes you there. And I think we need those examples at all levels. So I really appreciate this discussion and getting there through all of the chit chat from everyone. I greatly as a coach.
I mean, you're reminding me, Karen, that the reading standards are written so that they can apply to all disciplines. So you're right, like as an entry level, using the language of the standards in a task is really useful for teachers. The next level is, okay, well, what is that represent in your discipline? And which is what Barbara did, right? Like in her discipline, word choices in ELA means diction, right? And so the first layer is actually use the standards in your task. And the next layer is customize it to your discipline in ways that are really appropriate, or translate it, I guess, maybe into your, something like that, right? That's kind of what you're saying, which is
Yeah,
think about as coaches and in terms of, we like build resources, right?
Yep.
Rebuilding the right resources that have teachers know that that's like one layer. And then your next layer is you're going to do this other thing. That's interesting.
What I find oftentimes with teachers who I work with is that they refer to the standards, but they don't spend time really thinking hard about them. And what I appreciated about this discussion, it was digging in and coming to an understanding, which I think really moves beyond using the language of the standards. Truthfully, I don't care what language one uses, even though I want the language of our discipline. But I want people to understand what those standards are really about, what the intent of them. And I thought that this discussion really got to that.
Yeah, and that's what I think too. The thinking that we're hearing and all the discussion that we're having is helping us think deeper about the information, and that's what I value, is that thinking process.
Yeah, it's super awesome. So one of the things I've been thinking about lately, given this protocol, so we've been using this protocol in a lot of our professional learning opportunities and in when we facilitate and stuff like that. And I keep thinking, like, what would happen if every week when you work with, if every week what teachers did in their PLCs, just every week did this, right? And you just all take turns and you throw up a task and you just go through this protocol and you workshop it like just every week. Does that conversation can that conversation become the regular conversation of what teachers talk about, right? Like, is your task, because Stevie, you even said they put the standards in there, but don't often get to like what it means.
Yeah.
Right.
Does LDC include examples of student work, exemplars?
So we have in lots of modules where teachers upload their student work. Yes, we have lots of student work in here. So you can search in our library and you can search by, for example, attachments, right? Look at student work samples. We've just collected about 2,500 student work papers. from across the country that we're going to, in the next year, we're going to be putting into sets with, rubrics and scores and examples to make examples for people of different types of things. So the answer is sort of.
The answer is we think that's super, super, super important, and we're doing everything in our power to make it the norm. That's the answer.
Well, we know that the task can be rich, but it's the student work that counts. And so it's what does this look like in action?
Yeah. And we do have lots of examples of things like, we do know, and there's been a lot of research that Scale has done, for example, that work in progress tasks typically result in much lower scored student work, right? And good to go and exemplary tasks result in much higher scored student work. Mm-hmm. So that's why we spend so much time focusing on task quality, is because of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right.
So 8 o'clock for you East Coasters.
Danielle, so tell us about what's coming.
Yes, so as you can see, we are going to be hosting these workshops every month. So we will have our next one will be May 1st at 10 a.m. And then we'll have another evening session May 15th at 7 p.m. So you'll use the same registration link for all of our upcoming events, and you'll be able to click the drop down to select any of the dates and register. We do highly, highly encourage you that if you have a task that you would like to have workshopped, we would really, really encourage you to submit your task to be workshopped, just as we did tonight with Barbara's. Also, if you are a coach working with a teacher and would like to submit that task to be workshopped so that you can take that back and work with the teacher, we also want to encourage that kind of that submission as well. So to do that in Core Tools, when you go to submit, if you want to go ahead and show how to do that on the screen. So when you go into a module, if you go into More Options and go to Submit for Review, you'll actually select the peer review event. And at the very bottom of the list, we have a task workshop submission section. And so this is going to be open for all of our upcoming offerings. And so we'll check these before, and we'll let you know about a week ahead of time if your task has been selected to do the workshopping session. If you can be in attendance, we'll do very similar like we did with Barbara, and think aloud and talk through those decision points to help you move that task to good to go or exemplary. So once you do that, you can submit that, and we will love to have your tasks to workshop just as we did tonight. But as I stated, we will do this twice a month. We'll have a morning session in 10 a.m.s and then an afternoon or an evening session. That way everyone can join. So we do encourage you to invite anyone who also wants to come. So Stevie, if you got some other colleagues that want to join.
Thank you. Yeah.
Karen and Kathy, if you got some colleagues or teachers that want to join as well, or some teacher leaders that you've been working with, please encourage them to join. We will record these and share these out to people who register. So even if they can't attend but would like to see how this workshopping protocol works in action, we'll be able to share that if they register as well.
And the last thing I'll say about that is we're trying to provide services so that you have additional support for the people that you work with that don't cost you anything. So this is one of those kinds of things. So again, it's open to anybody, and the recordings are available if you want to use them in PD.
Yep.
And the goal is to give you a little value add in terms of the services you're providing to schools. So
I appreciate it.
Bring it on.
And so we did, so we'll make sure you'll get the link to the recording, but you'll also have the link to the agenda as well. So all the resources that that Suzanne had on her screen, those will all be linked along with the registration link as well. So you can share that out as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This was a great session tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for coming.